Welcome to the Calm Cockpit. In today's episode, we're talking with pilot and entrepreneur Nick Smith, founder and creator of Part-Time Pilot, an aviation ground school and compendium podcast. He'll break down how his difficult experience in flight training combined with his entrepreneurial spirit to create a unique business in the world of general aviation flight training.
We'll also cover some tips and tricks on how to survive flight training with a clear head and ways of persevering through some of the difficult plateaus that occur, especially when you're a new pilot pursuing a private pilot certificate. Nick will also discuss how there are opportunities in aviation everywhere if you just know where to look. The Calm Cockpit podcast starts now.
Onyx 12 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. I'm Geeta Brown, midlife student pilot and licensed yoga and meditation educator with over 30 years of experience teaching high performers how to improve their lives without adding stress.
And I'm John Niehaus, corporate pilot and professional flight instructor.
I am so excited for today's episode, and I think I say that in every episode. I also say that every episode is my favorite episode. So going on with this trend, I want to tell you guys how the episode's going to roll before we get into it. John and I are just going to chat a little bit to set up the interview with Nick, give you a little context. Then you'll hear the fantastic interview, which is more of a discussion between the three of us with Nick. And then on the back end, John and I are going to come back and kind of pick away and dive a little bit into some of the key takeaways that we discovered with Nick. I think student pilots and entrepreneurs at all levels are going to find really great food for thought today. So let's get to it.
As we mentioned in the show opener, I'm excited to welcome special guest to this episode, Nick Smith. He's the founder and creator of parttimepilot.com and the host of a podcast by the same name. Nick started Part-Time Pilot to, in his own words, help student pilots save time and money, the two biggest hurdles in becoming a pilot, by providing new age resources and comprehensive ground training and mentorship. Nick has a bachelor's and a master's in aerospace engineering with over 10 years of experience as a propulsion and flight test engineer, and he's also now a private pilot and ground instructor, or certificated ground instructor. He founded Part-Time Pilot in 2020 after going through his own private pilot training struggles. Part-Time Pilot currently provides free study guides, free audio lessons in their audio ground school podcast, free courses on how to navigate flight training and save money. And then they also do thousands of dollars in scholarships every year to student pilots across the United States.
So I'm that midlife student pilot. And when Nick reached out to us about the podcast, I was like, man, that sounds familiar, because student pilots everywhere, I'm sure you can agree that we are the kings and queens of the Google search. So how many videos have you watched looking for the one that's going to explain to you the concept that you're struggling with? I was like, man, he looks so familiar. So I looked in my YouTube history, and sure enough, I have watched like 5 of his videos before I ever met him. I think the first one I ever watched from him was on how temperature affects altimeter readings. And that was way back when I was like, I thought like altitude was altitude. Little did I know there are many kinds of altitude. And what I was really struck by in that video, and why I then watched subsequent videos, is he has this engineer's understanding of the material. You could feel the depth beyond what he's telling you in the private pilot curriculum. But he's also really great at just breaking it down in a step-by-step sequence, which I think is that engineer's brain. But I would just found great value in it. So when he reached out to us and was like, hey, I think we have some good common ground that we could help some folks with our 2 podcasts, I was like, yes, please. And I think hopefully you guys will really enjoy this interview, because you get that not only behind the scenes look on what he struggled with in his training, but how he turned that into a real growth opportunity for him in his own life, but really in being service to the aviation community in general, which I think is such a fantastic thread that runs through a lot of our guests is that people get excited about what they do, then they want to share it with other people. I think he's a great representative of that. So I think with no further ado, we will roll right into the interview with Nick.
Nick, welcome to the Calm Cockpit podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, great. We're happy to have you. And we've got a great conversation ahead of us and looking forward to hearing your perspective on flight training and all that comes with it.
Yeah, I can't wait. Thanks for having me on. And it's nice being able to meet you guys and chat with you guys. And I'm super thankful for you letting me come on.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, Nick, he approached us as a way of having sort of a collaborative discussion between our podcast and the part-time pilot. And before we get too much into everything, tell us a little bit about yourself and how the part-time pilot came to be and how you think your flight training went.
Yeah. So aerospace has been a big part of my life for a long time. Ever since I went and saw a rocket launch on Cocoa Beach when I was like 8 years old, I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I went to aerospace engineering as my degree, and then after that worked at Boeing, did some flight test engineering, and then that's when I began. After about 5 or 6 years working in the industry, I started to get my pilot's license and do that journey. I started it in Seattle and it went super, almost like too good. I had this very 80-year-old instructor at the Boeing flying club, and Boeing was helping pitch in for it a little bit, not a ton. It was a good rate, especially compared to nowadays. And I think I soloed at like 7 or 8 hours, and then was doing a cross country. And then I decided to move to San Diego, which I recommend people don't move in the middle of flight training. So I learned everything the hard way in flight training. So I moved. Then I just picked, the first flight school that gave me the lowest quote. It turns out it wasn't the best flight school. Went through like 5 different flight instructors. Just mistake after mistake after mistake that I made personally because I didn't know any better. I didn't kind of put in a plan, do the work ahead of time to make the best decision. And so it dragged on for, I think I ended up getting my private pilot's license at like 90 hours, even though, like I said, I had all the knowledge from aerospace engineering. Like I knew what I was talking about. It came naturally to me as well. It was just kind of the stuff behind the scenes, the requirements, the money, all that kind of stuff that you don't really think about until you're in it. So that's kind of where part-time pilot was birthed. By the time I got my private pilot training, I hated flying. Like it was so stressful and time consuming, and I spent way too much money. I was thinking I was going to spend 10 grand. I spent like $25,000 to get it. And I just thought if someone who I thought it was a good pilot on the sticks, I knew all the knowledge from, my job and my degrees. If it was that hard for me, how many people are making these mistakes basically? So I started just a social media to tell people all the mistakes I made and kind of give advice, try and find student pilots before they made the wrong decisions that I made, help them find the right flight school, tips and tricks, things like that. And then, I started asking the question. A lot of people were like, what do I do for ground school? And one of my key recommendations was to get a good ground understanding first, because I thought that was the one thing that did really help me, is because I had that previous knowledge. So I was able to just instinctively fly and not think as much. That kind of led to the idea of, well, why don't I make my own ground school? And so that's kind of how part-time pilot was started.
So it's one of those things where, as a long-time flight instructor, I started instructing back in 2009. And of course, I spent a long time at NAFI as their program director. Stories like yours kind of break my heart a little bit.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, unfortunately, during this period of time, flight instructors are very transitory. And so there's some issues there. And, flight schools also, with the way the economy has kind of bounced back and forth over the years, the flight schools have struggled to get students. And I'm not making excuses for either the schools or the instructors, but too often a good instructor has to overcome some of those bad tastes that you get when you're a student struggling to try to just get some consistency and get somebody to tell you what do you do now? Right. And, that was something that we always struggled with at NAFI. I was telling Geeta yesterday that it's really difficult because we wanted to find a way to educate students. But how does a student who doesn't know anything about aviation go to the National Association of Flight Instructors and go, hey, I'm sure you probably know what you're talking about. What do we look for? And so it's this kind of like cyclical problem of, we need to get to the students, the student needs to get to us, but nobody really knows, how to connect the dots there. So I think that what you're trying to do is very admirable, especially from somebody who's been in that field for a long time. And I think it's really important that we're having this discussion. And where our two podcasts meet, and we'll talk a little bit more about Part-Time Pilot and the fact that, yes, it is more than a podcast, but where some of this discussion meets is the idea that, we all want to find that performance edge, find a way to make training easier, to get people to retain knowledge, to have sort of that straighter line instead of the zigzags up and down all the time. And that doesn't always mean that it's somebody who's an established pilot going to recurrent like me. Sometimes it is pilots who are just starting out or maybe haven't even started. And so I think that this discussion is extremely valuable for those that are looking for a way of making their training easier, for bringing that sort of stress level of I'm doing this brand new thing and it's a little bit scary, all the way down to, okay, whew, if Nick had all of these troubles and I can learn from some of these things, then maybe my training will be a little bit easier. So I really appreciate that you're willing to come on and tell us the story and sort of talk about some of the lessons learned that you had.
I totally agree with everything you said. I've had, originally my thought with Part-Time Pilot was the student having continuity throughout their training is a huge thing.
In my opinion, it's understandable, like you said, that instructors are a little bit on that transitory nature, but it's also important for us as instructors to take responsibility for our students and realize that, we are providing this product. And if I'm going to leave to an airline, it's incumbent upon me to make sure that the students that I have that have helped me get there are taken care of so that as I step out the door, their progress is not hindered by, whatever might happen next in terms of the next instructor or flight school or airplane. All of that's taken care of. You tell your story on the podcast. I listened to that as I prepared for this episode because of all of the trials and tribulations and some of these lessons that we're going to talk about. I think the first thing I really want to ask you is, how did you survive some of the disappointment and the frustration that came with kind of a constant start-stop that you had?
That's a good question. It was hard. Like I said, by the time it was over, I really wasn't enjoying it at all. I would say having the support of my now wife was huge, having someone talk me off the ledge and not say, hey, you're wasting our money or you're wasting your time or anything like that. And just being supportive is super huge. And I know not everyone has that. That's why it's so important to reach out to the aviation community. You can find people and mentors online and or your flight school or flying club. And so I recommend students do that if they don't have that, because it's going to get hard. Even if it isn't as hard as my journey, it's going to get hard. There's going to be times where you're like, what am I doing? Like, do I belong as a pilot? Like, I just had a hard landing. Like, I almost killed myself. Like, what is happening right now? So no matter how good you are, I think that thought is going to cross your mind once at least. So
it's funny. I love how sometimes these interviews intertwine amongst the different people that we talk about, because a couple episodes ago, we actually interviewed a really good friend of mine, Greg Brown. And his big thing was similar to what you just said, which is, find a support group, find a mentor, find somebody who can kind of be your cheerleader. And I'll have Geeta kind of chime in on this because she's sort of in the thick of it right now. But Greg actually created the Student Pilot Pep Talk group on Facebook, which is one of the more active sort of aviation learning groups on Facebook. And
wait, what's it called? I've never seen that before. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's called the Greg Brown Student Pilot Pep Talk group. And it is a bunch of pilots, but also a bunch of student pilots. And it's very much a cheerleading group. Everybody asks questions of, hey, I'm encountering this. What did you do to overcome this? Because I can't seem to get my landing profile site right. I can't seem to do this, or I'm struggling with cross countries. And it's an extremely positive group. Everybody on there is amazing. So pilots, if you're listening from that group, just know that we love you. But I have heard story after story from people who have succeeded because of the mentorship and positivity that group brings. So it's funny how there's consistent sort of threads between different people that come on and talk about these things.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the things I was going to say, and I still think is helpful, is like, if you don't have somebody, you could, in today's world, you can start a vlog or whatever showing, and people will come out, watch your stuff. And there's going to be but with that, there's going to be a lot of negative people. So having spaces like that, I've never heard of that. I'm going to go join that. I think that's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah. Having spaces like that is really important.
Hearing you talk, Nick, I am right in the thick of it. I'm like, I said when we started the podcast, like, oh, I'm going to do my solo cross countries this winter. And then cue 8 weeks of wind and snow. And I didn't fly for like almost 2 months. I'm scheduled 2-3 times a week sometimes, and nothing ever got off the ground. I'm not the only one in New England who did that. So I'm at that point, like, is this ever going to happen? Because I'm doing the work of showing up, but I can't control the climate and the weather. Darn.
That was my hardest. Sorry to just, that was my hardest time. The solo cross countries. That was the most difficult part of it all.
Yeah. It's, being in the murky middle, they call it, when you, the end is too far off, you can't see it, and you've lost the luster of the beginning, is the hardest part. And I think your whole point, though, about family support is one we haven't actually talked about a lot on the podcast yet. We've talked about the aviation community, the Greg Brown student pilot pep talk group, finding mentors. Like, I have a mentor through Women in Aviation International. But to your point of finding family and or close friends who are maybe not aviation related to support you, I think is really huge. Because, my friends are a bunch of music nerds and yoga nerds. They don't know anything about this world, but they support me. So they want to know, how is it going? What are you doing? And just their curiosity and enthusiasm gets me through in a different way, because I think without having that in your corner and having that negativity at home dragging you down about all the money flowing out of the door, it's going to make it even harder. So I think there's a conversation in there somewhere in the future for people who have either a spouse or a partner or a close family, to sit them down and explain to them why it's important to us that we do this career or this training. Because if they don't know and they're not invested in it, that can be another huge source of stress. So what would you say to me? I haven't yet done the solo cross countries. Like, I feel like all the pieces are there, but all the external structure of it isn't coming together, right? All I can do is keep showing up. But if the weather doesn't cooperate, I can't do much. I'm studying all the ground stuff. I'm getting close to like consistently getting better at the FAA written. I've almost taken that. I'm taking all the practice tests now. So I'm in that murky middle where I feel like it's never going to happen. What do you say to build someone like me up to say, keep going? Or what's your advice for just managing? Like, literally, it's the mental stress of it's taking so freaking long that is dragging me down a little bit. And I am an endlessly positive person.
Yeah, man, my advice is, one, to understand that it is tough. Like you say, like, to give yourself the grace to be like, this is hard. Like, it's not supposed to be easy. It's hard. And everyone that goes through it, it's hard for them. And so I think, one, doing that. Two, what you said is keep showing up. One of the big things to add on to that, when you can't get your solo cross countries done, like I was doing those in San Diego, and you think, oh, what a great place to not have weather problems. Well, I was doing it like starting in May gray season, where we got the overcast marine layer right until about 10 or 11 a.m. But I have to get out. My solo cross countries were to East California, the eastern part of California, to the desert. And I had to get there by 10 or 11 a.m. or otherwise it would be over, the temperature limit for the aircraft. It would be like 110 degrees by like 11 a.m. So like I had this smallest window, and something I never would have thought of, right? Flying in San Diego would be a problem. I would just be like, you know what? I'm just mad. I just leave the flight school without rescheduling a flight for the next day. And then the next day it's perfect weather, right? So just like keep showing up and keep rescheduling. That would be my advice. But like I said, there's not an easy fix or tip that I can give you, unfortunately.
Can't wave a magic wand and just make it so I can fly 3 days a week reliably for a couple of weeks? Come on.
Yeah, I know.
So I'll steal a line from the NAFI president, Paul Prydecker, and we created stickers for this. And it was attitude is everything. And the whole thing is that when you maintain a certain level of motivation and maintain a certain level of positivity through your flight training, you do fly better. And that is at all levels of aviation, no matter how skilled or in the process of learning you are. And so I guess my other question to you, having had several different instructors through your private and probably then some, your podcast kind of outlines the trials and tribulations and some of the things that were struggles. But I had a captain once that I used to fly with, and he used to tell me, you're going to fly with a lot of captains and you're going to pick up the good things that you go, boy, when I'm a pilot, when I'm a captain, when I'm a flight instructor, I'm going to take these things and remember them and go, this is going to be me. And of course, you're also going to get these are things that I absolutely did not like about this person and what they did. And when I grow into whatever that looks like, I'm never going to do that. So we already know about some of the things that weren't so good. You know, maybe what were a couple things that instructors did that sort of did help motivate you and push you forward? Anything memorable?
Yeah. My last instructor, the one thing that was great about him was just like, he would make sure that I was prepared for the flight. So like that I did all I could prior to at home, so that when we get there, my mind isn't immediately behind the aircraft mentally. Like have that done and clear out of your mind by the time you show up. Just like everything you can do to kind of help your chances and clear your mind for when you do fly. And so that was one from him. And then my first instructor was just super positive, positive and encouraging, and just all these compliments and positivity that I think really, really helped me just do better. Like you said, when you feel confident and have that right attitude, it really makes a difference. It really does.
Yeah. And so, you take this experience and the instructors and the different schools, and you kind of package them up and said, I'm going to use this to help people, right? And one of the things you told us when we did our pre-show interview was that you wanted to save people time and stress, which leads to saving money, which I think is a really sort of profound thing to say. How did you kind of come up with that? And what is your ground school doing for achieving those goals?
Yeah. So anytime I think of a new feature or anything, it's with that in mind. I try and keep those things in mind because that was the ultimate kind of goal, right? I thought the biggest kind of hurdle for people was money because it is expensive, but no one starts flight training if they don't think that they can pay for it, right? So eventually people that start flight training, they have agreed in their mind that they're going to pay for a certain amount and they're going to take on that expensive thing. So it's like, okay, they've already gotten past that hurdle, past the expensive hurdle, but then there's things that can happen that make it more expensive, right? Like I talked about in my training. And that comes with like time and stress. You guys are Calm Cockpit. You guys know this very well. A stressed pilot makes more mistakes. And when you're flight training with a flight instructor and you're stressed and you're making mistakes, is that flight instructor going to be like, great job, we're on to the next lesson now? No, they're going to be like, we got to repeat this lesson. Well, there's another $500, right? Every time you go up and fly. So that's kind of an example with the stress thing. So then the time, I realized that the vast majority of student pilots are short on time, right? It's probably a small percentage that are like, I'm doing this full time. Most of us have a job to pay for flight training, or we have kids, or we're taking care of somebody, something like that. So our time is limited. So anything that we can do to reduce the amount of time or make their studying more efficient is something we try and incorporate in the ground school. So some examples. So like our audio lessons, we have, and that's kind of what our podcast mainly is I just go through our online ground school and we make an audio lesson. We have all of them in there already, but we're also kind of re-releasing them for free on the podcast. But it's been a huge hit because people can listen to it on their lunchtime at work. They can listen to a ground school lesson while they're driving, while they're mowing the lawn, while they're doing the dishes, while they're working out. People have absolutely loved that. And so that idea came about with how can we make the studying more efficient. Another example is AI. Like AI is it's changing a lot of things, but education is huge. Anybody with AI can get expert level education, right? And so we were incorporating a lot of AI features into our ground school. So one of the things is it's a live voice-to-voice ATC simulator. So like it gives you scenarios and from beginner or whatever, and you just work with it. You can tell it your tail number. You can tell it your airport. It'll use that. And you can say, hey, I'm just beginning. So go step by step, or testing you where it plays the role of ATC. And so just another tool to practice that at home instead of in the cockpit where you might make a mistake. So I think, did I answer your question? I kind of feel like I'm babbling, but
yeah, I think you did. It's okay. You're talking about my favorite thing. Anybody who's listened to any of the episodes that I've done, I get jazzed about. I don't want to call them shortcuts, but the idea of the hack, the idea of something that can help improve little bits, but quickly. Because at least from my instructor perspective, but also as a student, I suppose. Who doesn't love quick results? And who doesn't love being able to show when you're providing a student a product, which is instruction? The most fun thing is to watch them grow and watch them realize that they're growing. And so if you are creating a ground school product like this, that is integrating some of these things where, okay, if you can go and have homework for the night and talk to ATC and come back and do that flight with your instructor the next morning and knowing in your head, like, hey, I did this. Maybe I didn't even tell them. And next thing you know, you're nailing radio calls when yesterday you were flubbing, just talking to tower. And the instructor looks over, hey, you've been practicing. Like, who doesn't love that? That feels great.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that you're integrating some of these sort of quick practice items into a ground school because practice makes perfect and progress just feels good.
I've been trying to figure out like why it works so well in conjunction with that idea of reducing stress. Because we all know like having more repetition of the material is good. It's convenient. I'm doing yard work. I can listen. But I've been reflecting on it from a midlife pilot who has a full life and a full career doing other things. That when I was in college for music, I was in college for music. And like, John, you were in college for aviation. Like you're steeped in it. So like, even when you're not studying, you're like in the dining hall, someone will say something. It's kind of in the air around you. You're always kind of getting these little refreshes of information and knowledge. Whereas for me, midlife student pilot, no one at home is talking about crosswind landings and like what the METAR said yesterday. No one even speaks that language. So things like the podcast and listening to it, it just gives me like another voice, literally your voice in my head while I'm in the backyard. But repeating these concepts and getting that language like immersion, which then reduces my stress because I don't feel like I'm on the struggle bus with being sort of disconnected from it when I'm not around it. And it kind of integrates it with my life in a way that I was maybe more immersed in topics when I studied them when I was younger and in college. So I don't think that can be understated. It sounds simple, like, oh, listen to a podcast and it's a hack, which is true, John. It is a hack. I know you love your hacks. However, it is literally decreasing stress because it's keeping you somewhat plugged into a community and keeping not only the information refreshed, but keeping that sense of social connection alive a little bit. And like you said, then you go into the airplane the next time and it's not like you're this individual who's been sitting there alone with a book, but you're still plugged into a community. So I think it's such a simple tool and it's really awesome of you to release it for free. Can we pause and applaud that? I mean, these are straight up ground school lessons So it's been helpful for me to reduce my stress. So thank you.
I think that's a really widely positive thing. And it is tough because when I was an instructor, a lot of times my most difficult students, and not difficult from a educational standpoint, but from a motivation and just consistency standpoint, it was really hard to teach somebody who was successful. Because like you said, they have other jobs, they have responsibilities, especially the more successful they got in whatever profession they were in, the busier they were. And the more their brain was over here going, man, I've got all these spreadsheets that I got to deal with, while I'm like, hey man, over here, you're flying an airplane. Don't worry about spreadsheets. Yeah. And so it's really tough to separate people from those really important, successful type responsibilities and get them to study for a ground school. And God forbid you want them to study for the written test. That's a whole nother thing as an instructor. So I think what you're saying is so early in your pilot career is huge. It's something that a lot of people take years to really understand and need to be, full-fledged CFIs to really see it in others. So I think that's commendable.
Yeah. And you hit on such a key point, especially as you get more advanced and you get into like IFR procedures and things like that. It's so important to have your head completely clear while you're flying. And that's why I love your guys' podcast. In that is, head clear, you're calm, right? That's all kind of involved. And one of the things, like, immersing yourself in podcasts and things like that. So let's say you hear a word for the first time, some aviation word for the first time on a podcast, and then you understand what it is. Where if you were to hear it for the first time in a cockpit, just for that split second, your brain is like, what is that? What is that? I'm thinking about it, instead of flying, and even for that split second. Yeah. But if you have immersed yourself in that world and the language and the terminology, just one more thing that is going to keep your mind free to fly.
And one of the other things that I really like to do is steal knowledge from people who are in other areas of industries. Obviously, you've gotten into the ground school side of things, but you were an aerospace engineer and you've done all of these other things in life. And as Geeta can attest, because I dragged her into this, trying to learn from her yoga and musical experience, what kinds of things did you use from being an engineer and going to school for something completely different to then help you through your flight training? Maybe even things that you stole from that background and integrated into developing this flight school or ground school.
That's a great question, because I have a good answer.
Excellent.
No, but also it's a really good question. For flight training, so people out there who don't like math, like, don't freak out. You can still be a pilot. Okay. You can, every single math problem in aviation, they've made a chart or procedure for people who don't like math. So don't worry. And we teach both of those in the ground school. But for me, having all that math knowledge, it does help. So I had a cross-country spreadsheet in Excel, right? And then, so I started like making, well, I could just have this column automatically calculate for me. And then, okay, I could have this column automatically calculate for me. And then it got to the point where, okay, well, I need my aircraft performance. So I started putting my aircraft performance into the spreadsheet and like turning the performance graphs into equations. And then so that my spreadsheet would just automatically do that for me. So things like that were really helpful in having those for cross-country planning. And then for the ground school, I would say the biggest thing is, like, have you ever seen like an engineering document, a manual that you buy for like a vacuum or whatever it is? It's going to be written by an engineer, like, and it's very like step-by-step tutorial, like Lego manual type thing. So I think what's helped students a lot in the ground school is I don't say, okay, here's how to do this problem, and then here's some practice problems. It's here's how to do this problem. And then here's like every type of example you might get. And here's the step-by-step of what to do. And I think a lot of times I know me as a student, they might do one example, but then the first problem on the quiz is something that doesn't apply to that example. And I'm like, wait, you didn't tell me how to do this. Now I got to go find out. So like I tried to like have that not happen in the ground school, just step-by-step kind of procedures, leaving no stone unturned type of thing.
I love the engineer's brain for that. That's awesome, to break it on down, because for someone like me, I need things broken down at that level. Otherwise, like you said, my brain then perseverates on that And while I'm trying to fly the airplane, I'm still thinking about how I'm not good at those concepts. I can't do this. It's that mental chatter. Because I just want to kind of zoom back for a minute. When we have something that we love and then it kind of gets ground down through the grind of learning it, it's really common. I see it, especially in music. People graduate music school and they tell me, I feel dead inside. They train their whole life to be a professional and they're up there on stage at Carnegie Hall, but inside they're like, I hate this. I hate my life. So I'm always interested to see what people do to regroup from that and find their own unique path forward, which it sounds like to me, it's wanting to share the lessons learned, put together a product of value to help other people not struggle, but also find your own way to flying that makes sense for you. And I really commend you for being all in with it or not. John and I have talked about that. I see a lot of general aviation pilots who I'm like, do you take it as seriously as if you were a professional? Because to me, that's how you either do that or you shouldn't be flying. I don't think you can kind of dip in and out of it.
I am a little scared if I'm not fully 2 feet in. And I think that's okay to say because I think it's healthy and provides a safer environment if you step back when you don't feel fully safe and confident. And I know that has to do with how much energy and time I can put in. So that's kind of what I'm waiting for.
Well, and that's kind of the intent of the podcast. I mean, when we were talking about what we were trying to achieve with just the show in general, I have thought a lot about some of the trials and tribulations that I've gone through and the things that have stressed me out and the things that have caused me certain levels of anxiety. And like you said, so often it comes down to we don't talk about it. I'm great. I'm good. I survived. And, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. And I guess you could say that that's true. But if you never tell somebody that it's hard and discuss the things that make it hard, then you're never going to make a difference in the industry. You're never going to make a positive influence on those that are trying to achieve what they think you did easily. I so often use the idea that you see the duck and the duck looks super calm. What you don't see is the fact that underneath their little legs are going like crazy. And that's kind of how it is. I mean, you see the captain at American and United and Delta and the corporate pilots and these pilots in uniform, and they're walking very professionally through the airport. And you go, man, I would really like to be like that person, calm, cool, collected. I'm sure it was easy for them. I'm sure they passed every check right. I'm sure they never had an instructor who said, hey, that didn't go well. In reality, I mean, they might go to recurrent every 6 months and have an instructor go, oof, you want to try that one again?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's okay, because that's how we learn.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're brand new and you see all of these things, and putting myself in yours and Geeta's shoes, and you're showing up to a lesson and the instructor goes, we need to work on your site profile because I'm not sending you solo. That feels like a crushing defeat sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like I'm watching the other students in the lobby of the flight school who are all smiling and happy and they're progressing. Why aren't I? And so sharing these stories so that people realize that if it was totally easy for you, you're probably lying.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all been lied to because we all know those people. And some people do have an easier time. But that doesn't mean they never struggle.
Right.
And so verbalizing these things is a huge reason why this podcast exists.
Yeah, I love what you guys are doing. And yeah, like social media just breeds the show your successes and hide your failures type of environment. And it seems that the ones that only show their successes get more followers. And so it's like, it's kind of a messed up system in that way. And I'm so glad you guys are doing what you're doing and why I was compelled to reach out.
Anyone listening who's feeling like, oh, I should be able to just fly around on Sunday. What's wrong with me or whatever? No, that is like the higher intelligence part of your brain making a good decision. And the whole thing of bravado of like, oh, I trained in it, so I should just be able to do it. It's like, no. Every time before I fly, I'm like, am I really up for this today? This morning I had a lesson and I was struggling. Just a bunch of stuff happened at the house. the lesson got delayed. I had to leave early and I was feeling all this pressure. I want to go flying. I haven't been able to fly in 2 weeks. And I stopped myself. I was like, is this really that important? Like, are you going to push yourself and show up all stressed out to your lesson? You could just cancel and take a beat, or you could get your head in the game and fully focus on going and making the use of like the half hour you're actually going to get to fly. But I feel like if we're not asking ourselves those questions, especially in GA, when it's just us up in those planes, that takes bravery to me to actually ask the question, to answer it, and to sometimes say, not right now. That is brave to me. So
yeah, I appreciate
congrats
that.
on that decision. It's
Pilots,
really important.
It's such a, like, at least for me, it's such a macho look to it, right? Top Gun and astronauts, and just growing up with that I think, as a guy, I was kind of alluding to, it's not easy to admit those things sometimes. So hopefully everybody, like you did today, it's just, and I know it's tough with flight training because you're like, another day I didn't fly.
What brings you joy in flying? What keeps bringing you back? As somebody who's sitting there going, I'm on the fence of trying this, or I'm on the fence of quitting. Mm-hmm. What about it keeps bringing you back?
I would say the idea of like adventure. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, but when I decided to become a pilot, it was the idea of being able to have my own plane and fly to another state and bring some camping stuff, and that type of adventure feeling is really what continues to bring me back and make me want to continue flying. I just love that stuff. So
aren't we lucky that we live in a country where we can do that? Like,
yes.
And think about how huge our country is. Like, I work with the Fear of Flying community, and they're based in the UK. So they're like, well, we take off and we fly for a minute, but then we have to turn around because we ran into France, or like, we have such a huge country that we can in GA fly across with no barrier besides the money and the time and the discipline. But boy, we have it really, really good.
So as we start to wind things down a little bit, I've got one other sort of topic that I want to bring up with you, and it's kind of near and dear to me because I was always on the airline track and didn't realize that there's this whole other world, and it doesn't always have to be airlines. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the term GA is huge. That encompasses anything from charter to corporate flight departments to aviation associations like EAA and NAFI and AOPA and all of the suppliers and vendors. There's just, I could go on and on. And so, like, I love the idea as somebody who tries to mentor people getting into the industry to tell them there's so much you can do, and don't limit yourself to just one specific thing unless that thing is what you love. And also remember that maybe if it turns out that, like Geeta said about getting it to Carnegie Hall and finding out you don't like it, that's okay too. Like, there's other options. And the point that I'm trying to get to here is that you kind of got into aviation, and then you had this entrepreneurial spirit that made you think of an idea and build this thing that has become Part-Time Pilot. What's your advice to somebody who's getting into aviation and isn't quite sure what they want to do yet, but maybe they've got a kernel of an idea of, like, I might be able to help people by creating X? Like, what does somebody do, and how do they follow in your footsteps?
Yeah. So, great question. And I would say when I first started flying, I had no idea. I just knew I wanted to get my pilot's license. And so I think if you have that to start, once you get in, it's going to, like, it's like a nozzle. It's going to just expand completely. Like, when I first, I was like, what can I do with my pilot's license? I don't know. I'll go on adventures. Like, that's literally the only thought I had on what I could do with my private pilot's license and that knowledge. And then once I got in it, like, I have like, one of my problems is too many ideas now, like, of what I could do and all the places you can go once you're in a niche or a world like general aviation. Even if you don't know, as long as you you have the want to, I think the ideas will expand and come to you if you try to think creatively once you're in the world and you can see the different possibilities. They really expand once you dive into it. It would be my advice.
Yeah, I used to listen to a podcast, and the host of the podcast had been in a lot of different things. He actually created, for those that might be aware, the brand The Nerdist, which is sort of a cult following for movies and video games and things like that. And one of the things that he always said, because he's been hosts of TV shows, he's been radio hosts, he's done all of these things, and so many of them he has created. And in his podcast, he used to talk about the fact that he didn't want to wait for somebody to build something for him, because it's so much better to create it yourself, and then you have all of that control. And he said, though, the issue that you have when you're in that space is that perfection becomes a problem. And as Geeta can say, we've talked about perfection so many times over the course of the podcast already, and we haven't had that many episodes. But if you wait for the thing to be perfect, then you're never going to do it. And I'm sure, we've encountered that on this podcast, and I'm sure you encountered it when you created yours and the ground school, that like sometimes you just have to put something into the world, because if you wait for it to be this thing that no one can ever criticize, it's just, you're never going to get it off the ground. Right.
It's so good. There's a like entrepreneur coach that I followed for a while, and he has this challenge for people who want to start their own business to just launch it before you make it. Like literally just say, hey, I'm going to do this. This is how much it costs. And it like forces you to then build it. And like, because you can spend so much time building it and it's still not going to be perfect. And like, that's really scary to just like have somebody pay for something as, when I haven't even made it yet. But like, so my engineering brain wouldn't allow me to do that. I had to make it first. But like, it's so true. Like, just start. Like, I wish I had, like, my wife has recently started her own business, and I'm telling you, I wish I would have just like launched it sooner, and just trying to be a perfectionist about everything, when I guarantee you, no matter how perfect you think you are, someone's going to find something wrong with it anyways. So just do it. Yeah, that's so good.
And
Awesome.
I love that you start it, and we have to remind ourselves that we have to keep almost restarting every day, because the mind will throw up endless blocks of why it's a bad idea to progress or advance or add that new tool. We have to, it's almost like a war with ourselves, angel on one shoulder, devil on the other. That resistance will come up every time. We have to just keep reminding ourselves, just keep going. And it can feel a little bit like a restart sometimes. It's so important. I too am an entrepreneur, and I wish that I had left the jobs I had before much sooner. Like, I waited, because I wanted to be really sure I could do it on my own. And now I'm like, man, I wish I would have done it 5 years sooner. But we do it when we're ready. But I love that idea about just start. And I think it applies for pilots as well. If there's that next rating, or, you want to get that tail wheel or fly in the glider, it's like, sign up for the lesson now, even if the lesson is in 6 months, because that way you're pulling yourself forward. And I think that boosts mental health too, because you can see progress even while you're in, like I am, that murky middle of it's never going to get done. So I love that inspiration you're providing for people. It's awesome.
Yeah. And there's ways to do it smartly too, right? Like
Correct.
We don't just want to just like quit our jobs and go spend a bunch of money, but the idea of it to just, not have to be perfect, like you were saying, John. Yeah.
And enjoy the small wins, right? Make sure you realize that, hey, I passed my solo cross country, or I finished my private pilot rating, even if commercial pilot is on the agenda. Each of these little things is hugely important, back to that whole idea of motivation. So in flight training and in business, keep every day is a new challenge, and every day is a new win too. So
yep, I couldn't agree more. The small wins is another thing that just can get you through those murky middle, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Cool.
So Nick, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about all of these things. I feel like we kind of ran the gamut of many different topics, but I think there's a lot of value in what we chatted about and sort of the tips and tricks that you have. If anybody wanted to get more information on your podcast or the ground school or anything else that you're doing, where would they go and how would they get it?
Yeah. So parttimepilot.com. So 2 T's in a row, parttimepilot.com. And then our podcast is the Audio Ground School podcast. I think if you just search Part-Time Pilot in the podcast apps, that'll show up as well. And then, parttimepilot.com has all the information. Part-Time Pilot was taken on social media. So it's part.time.pilot on our social medias. We also have a Facebook study group where I feel like a king, but if someone's negative, I literally just boot them out. Like, I'm like, none of this.
Nice.
So that's why that group really resonated with me. I hadn't heard about that because some of the groups are just like, I'm like, why are we talking about this stuff? Why are we fighting? Like, can we just like be nice and like learn?
Yes.
So if you just search Part-Time Pilot in the groups, that should show up as well.
Excellent. Parttimepilot.com. Everybody give it a check. Even if you have already completed your ground school, I'm sure there's some valuable information in there. And once again, Nick, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
The thanks is all on me. Thank you guys so much for letting me come on. And you guys are great. I love the podcast. So thank you so much.
So we really hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Nick. I think that there are certainly some great takeaways and tips from this chat. And I thought we would just take a little bit of time to kind of go over and summarize. And I put my flight instructor hat on, you put your student pilot hat on, and kind of figure out where we meet in the middle here. And I've got some notes and the whole idea of how did you choose a flight school? And Nick commented on the fact that the criteria for him was it was one of the first ones I saw and it was one of the cheapest ones I could find. So Geeta, what about you? How did you pick yours?
That is a great question. The short answer is I used my intuition, which can sound very woo-woo, airy-fairy, but you have to understand that, like, I've spent years honing my intuition in a very clear way. It's not just like, oh, I went with my emotion. It means that I went with my discerning intelligence. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is that as an educator, I had on my educator hat, and I was really looking for a place where I could go and do more of like the master and apprentice style versus either getting it done quickly or just put me with whoever is there. And some people like to have a lot of different instructors. I knew for me, I wanted to have like a primary person. So I was really looking more for that person that I could build a relationship with as teacher and student to really maximize the learning. That's how we do it in classical music. It's all about you study with the one teacher till you've gotten everything you can out of that, and then you move on to another teacher. That's also how we do it in my yoga tradition as well. It's very much like you study with that person until you're ready to go out on your own. So that's what I was looking for. So I looked around for a school that would offer that, because a lot of them don't. It's like whatever instructor matches your schedule, that's who you go with. And I knew that for me, I would not trust that process. So I looked for a flight school where I could develop that relationship with one flight instructor or maybe two max. And that was the first thing. So I was obviously looking probably at a smaller flight school rather than some of the bigger ones that had a lot of turnover. And I just interviewed people and just, number one, saw if they were willing to meet with me. That was a big one, because a lot of them were kind of just like, come in, maybe we'll talk to you for 10 minutes. And then they wanted to like sign you up versus the place I ended up going and that I'm still at, where I think we ended up talking on the phone once for like an hour. And then I went in for like a meeting for an hour. And then I took a discovery flight. So that was a good fit for me. In other words, short answer, I knew my learning style. And I found a place that was going to support that, because that's just the way they naturally teach.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think that if you consider it, you mentioned the buzzword, and that's interview. And I think that's important. If you consider it kind of like a job interview Okay.
Mm.
Everybody assumes that a job interview is them interviewing you, right? But in reality, it's both ways. You
Yes.
need to make sure that the job fits you as much as the job needs to make sure that you fit them.
Yep.
And I think it's so important that when students are looking for a flight instructor, because remember, I mean, it's safe, but it's dangerous.
Yep.
You're putting your life in someone's hands, and not just while you're working with them, but after you earn your certificate, you're hoping that what you learned from them, now that you're by yourself, was the right thing.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have the time to interview that instructor and make sure that personality wise they fit, educationally they fit, because they could be a great instructor, but if they don't communicate with you in the way that you need, then none of it actually matters. And I used to tell that to my students all the time, to a point where we actually had a couple students. I was like, look, we like each other, we could be friends, but I don't think this is going to work.
Right.
And they can be more successful with somebody else, even though, I'm a good instructor. I can make it work, but making it work inevitably is a money costing experience.
Yes.
The other piece to it, and this is a mistake that I made during my instrument training, you get so comfortable and you get caught up with working with one person.
Right.
And maybe you didn't know that person very well when you started, but you get midway through the training and you realize, like, oh man, I don't like this person, or they're not teaching me the right way. And it's so important that students know that it's okay to say, I think I need a different instructor. I didn't. I struggled. I suffered through it because I didn't want to hurt his feelings, or I didn't want to be a jerk, or any of those kinds of things. And it did cost me more money. I know for sure that it did. And I was miserable. I hated my instrument training because the instructor was just not somebody that I could mesh with. And so, those are the two big points. If you need to try to get to know the person before you start, and if for some reason in the middle it doesn't work, be honest with yourself, be honest with the instructor, and just say, look, I think that we need to find another plan here. And a lot of people don't do that. Another point that Nick brought up, and I think that this is huge, is, and frankly, it's a great idea because we did cover this one in a podcast already. So we're onto something here, I think. The importance of mentorship in aviation. He brought that up and really highlighted it, especially for those that are starting out, but I think it applies to anybody regardless of where you are. Even in my position where, someone would say like, hey, you've kind of gotten to the pinnacle, which I wouldn't use those words, but others would. I still have mentors. I still really think that that's valuable in talking with people more experienced than me who have been there and done that. And, in your place, you're in the thick of it. So what is your thoughts on that? I mean, I know you've already kind of said that you think it's important, but give me another soundbite. What are you thinking about that?
I think that for me, finding mentors outside of my flight school was one of the primary things that helped me start to turn the corner. Initially, I needed the safety of that nest of my flight school because I had so much fear of flying. I needed to keep the window very small of my experience at first. But then once I got over that hump, I needed to look beyond what I was just doing at my local airport and find mentors. So for me, Women in Aviation International, I've mentioned them before, they have a mentorship program. They make it so easy to find a mentor, actually to find several mentors. That has been tremendous. And what it's done for me, I have a mentor who is now flying for the majors. And I believe she was flying a biz jet before that. I might have that a little bit off, but anywho, and she's been a CFI. She's done a lot. Because I only check in with her like every 3 months, 4 months, she can see the trajectory of my personal growth when I cannot. She's like, oh my God, look at what you've done in the past 4 months. Where in my mind, I'm like, I haven't done my solo cross country still. I haven't done that. Like, I'm just like all the things I can't do. She's like, no, reality check. Here's where you were 4 months ago, and here's where you are now. That ability to see the things that you can't see in your own growth is huge. So that's what mentorship has done for me. And then especially being new to the field. I don't know. Well, now I know a lot more, but especially when I started, I knew nothing about this world at all. So having people normalize for me what is normal and typical in the industry and what's not really helped me increase my learning curve and made me realize that a lot of the problems I thought I had because I was a fearful flyer and I wore that identity so strongly, they're like, no, everybody struggles with that. It's not just you. So you can do it too. It's been really, really helpful. And I consider you, John, a little bit of a mentor now too. Let the record reflect.
That's cool. I am the prime example of the before and after. So
Really?
my going through college, going through school, which included all of my flight training, really, I didn't have anybody to look up to talk to, or any of that kind of stuff. Some of it was self-inflicted. I like to say that I am an introvert who tries to pretend to be an extrovert. That pretending didn't really start until after I got out of school. So, high school into college, I kind of had my close knit group of friends, and that was sort of about it. And NAFI was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because in that role, you don't have a choice. If you want to be program director of NAFI or involved in sort of that public facing thing, go to trade shows and all this stuff, you cannot be an introvert. You have to just learn to deal with it. And so I learned so much from that. And then included in that, and it sounds cliche because everything at NAFI is mentor, right? You've got NAFI Mentor Magazine, you've got eMentor, you've got all these things. It's built into the organization, and it truly tells you how important that is. And getting involved in that gave me Jason Blair. It gave me Bob Mader, who we've interviewed in the podcast. It gave me Paul Preidecker and all of the various board members and friends that I've met along the way. And you can absolutely see the difference in my confidence level and trajectory from school, where I was figuring it out on my own, to flight instructor, CFII, ATP, my first type rating, all of these things moving forward. It's all kind of smoothed out. And some of that is just general experience and being in the field. And I understand that too. But having somebody to call and say, look, this really didn't go well, is really kind of cool. I will never forget a conversation I had with my old boss at Western Michigan, because I was a flight instructor at Western Michigan. And I was going through airline training, and, it was going fine. It ended up going fine. And I got into my IOE experience, so initial operating experience there, and I was being very hard on myself. And I ended up calling the chief instructor at Western and just said, look, I don't know what to do here. I don't know if it's because I don't like it. I don't know if it's because I'm just not as good as everybody else or whatever. But I ended up having like an hour conversation with him, and it was like the fuzziness of the viewpoint just clarified itself. And all of a sudden I had this ability to reflect on what was going on with some clarity, and it's huge, and so I think that it absolutely, no matter what level you're in, mentorship is important.
So what else we got from Nick?
Yeah, and we'll sort of rapid fire some of these here, but he also mentioned the idea that it's important to get your family buy-in and support. If you have a significant other and your personal finances are affected by flight training, as we know that certainly happens, it's very difficult to be successful if that person is measuring your success in how many dollars are spent.
And how much time it's taking too. I hear all the time in my flight school, not all the time, I hear frequently that students, their families are pressuring them to get done in a certain time frame. And one of the best things that I did when I started this project, and when I start all of my other projects, which are many and varied, is I always sit down with my husband and I have a conversation. Here's what I'm doing. Here's why it's so important to me. Here's how it can help us as a couple. And then here's where I could use some help for you or assistance from you. And we'll, keep checking in as we go along. That clarity is great, because a lot of times I think we assume that our significant others or our family members, our parents, whoever it is that we are working with this project on, they know us. They know how important it is to me. They know what I'm doing. A lot of times they don't. They can't see inside of you and know how important this is. And if you sit down and make them part of the process in a very clear adult communication style way, I think it will eliminate a lot of the friction down the road. And so literally, we have a thing that we do as a couple where we go out to eat or we take a walk somewhere. And during that time frame is when we talk about a lot of the heavier stuff. And then when that conversation or that walk is over, we're done with the conversation. So it's like this concentrated time to kind of like do project management. And I found that that's really helped in times when it is taking me forever to do it. He never questions it because he knows the path I'm on and he trusts the trajectory because I informed him ahead of time what I was doing, why I was doing it, and how he could help me. I think it would soothe a lot of that friction. And if you haven't practiced that as a couple or as someone who's younger and your parents are helping you with this, practice doing it because people really like clarity. Clarity is kindness.
Yeah, I like that. And you know, it sort of follows in that same vein, but the idea of don't be afraid of the plateaus in the middle, or as you guys call it, the murky middle, you know, that also leads into don't compare yourselves with others. Your progress is not the same as somebody else's. My best friend, his dad was the chief pilot of Domino's. And so needless to say, this guy grew up in aviation. And I don't want to say he didn't struggle because he'd yell at me for saying that. But when I sat there quietly comparing myself to where he was at, because I had no idea what I was doing and he'd been in an airplane since he was little, like that's not a fair comparison.
Right. The murky middle is a horrible place to be. I can say that as I am reporting from the murkiest murk of the murk of the murk. Like I am doing all kinds of mental struggle right now. Like I am just struggling for so many reasons. And that's where I'm at. But I've been in the murky middle enough with my career and my life, and especially as a creative. And now hearing what Nick said, anyone who's in the murk with me, let us trust the murk. Because in that murk is where the idea and the gold is. Nick took that murky, I don't like this isn't working, I have all these friction points, and look at what he has created. A whole online ground school and a universe unto itself in the part-time pilot. Who knows what's coming out of my murk? I don't know, but I do trust enough to know that if you're sort of trusting that questioning, feeling like, why is none of this working? Why am I struggling? That if you just persist, eventually you find your way. And that's usually when you look back and you can see, oh, that's where the beginning of the awesome thing started. But you can't see it when you're so close to it. So that's when we will quit, though, is when it's so murky and so hard. So persevere on. And I think of you, John, you said you had the idea for this podcast back when you were struggling. You had anxious times and it wasn't all roses and posies when you got your ideal career. And now look where we are. So this is to all of my fellow brothers and sisters in the murk. And I'm saying it to myself, let us progress forward. Let us just trust if we just keep showing up every day, that eventually we will rise to the top.
I really love the end of the discussion because we started getting into less about the flight training itself and more about the idea of following your passion. And if you have a idea that you want to put into play to share with others, just do it. You know, not to quote Nike, but just do it. You can't be perfect. You can't wait for it to be perfect. You just got to get it out and let it take form as it goes.
Yes.
And so embracing that idea of the entrepreneurial spirit and knowing that if your passion in aviation is there's so many corners of this world.
I loved his analogy of that nozzle. He said, once you get into the training and you just start doing it, even if you're not clear where you're going, it will expand, like water coming out of that nozzle, and all the opportunities will come from there. I've been using that with some of my high school seniors who are going off to college and they're worried, did I pick the right career and everything? I'm like, just start, just go to college. Once you get there, it's like, water coming out of a nozzle. It's going to expand and you'll see things in the future that you are not able to even conceive of now.
And with that, all of Nick's contact info will be in the show notes. Information on the Part-Time Pilot Audio Ground School podcast and parttimepilot.com. So take a look in there for any information if we've piqued your interest. And as always, find us on social, rate us, subscribe to the podcast, make those automatic downloads happen, and fly smarter.
And stress less.
Ball Our one departure is Airbus 321, traffic holding crossing runway 33 left, 3 clear.